Okay, welcome back, Peter, to podcast episode 36.
Yeah, good to be back. I've had a few postponements, but
Yeah. I think we did one on the 12th earlier in the year as well. I can't remember when it was, but I'm glad that we're eventually getting to it. I'm ever so fractionally sick, so hopefully I don't cough too much in the recording, but if I do, then I guess there's not much I can do about it. All right, so the book is The Obstacle is the Way, and the subtitle is The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph by Ryan Holiday. And there's another title, Adversities into something I can't remember, but it's like very similar to Trials into Triumph. But it seems like there's two different options. Ours says the adversity to advantage. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's different countries' versions or something like that. Right, I'm gonna dig into the book summary and then we can get going. So, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday explores how adversity can be transformed into opportunity. Structured around three disciplines: perception, action, and will, it draws on Stoic philosophy and historical examples to illustrate how great figures have faced challenges and turned them into the path forward. Yeah, I don't know if you have any additional opening thoughts there.
No, I think most of it will be covered along the way, but I guess it is just... all in all, it's what we're going to discuss. Like I said, just the whole different view on obstacles. I think it's, for me, I want to say it came at the right time. I think, it's an interesting way to look at obstacles. I think, even the book says in the introduction to sort of say we'll get into that, that we so often see obstacles as bad things, but we don't necessarily have to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. We're gonna do this one fractionally different to how we normally do it, which this time we're gonna instead of just reading on a paragraph, on a chapter by chapter, we're gonna group a few together. So I'm going to start with just the preface and the introduction, and then we'll do around 4 or so in little groups. Right, the preface on page, and Peter, you're going to have to help, XIII. The Roman numerals
7,
get me again.
But actually,
7.
It starts on 8.
I always thought X is 5 and then...
Sorry, no, I lie. This is
13.
This is 13. V is 5. X is 10. So this is 13.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, okay. Oh, you're right. I see in the contents.
Yeah.
Yep. Roman numerals strike again. Okay, so the preface. In the year 170, Marcus Aurelius, known today as the last of the 5 great emperors, sat down to write, not to an audience or for publication, but to himself, for himself. And what he wrote is undoubtedly one of history's most effective formulas for overcoming every negative situation we may encounter in life. A formula for thriving, not just in spite of whatever happens, but because of it. Then on the next page, it's more than enough for us. And this is the quote from Marcus Aurelius. Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions, because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. And then he concluded with, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And then on the next page, as Matthew Arnold, the essayist, remarked in 1863, in Marcus we find a man who held the highest and most powerful station in the world, and the universal verdict of people around him was that he proved himself worthy of it. And then on the next page, can you get past the things that inevitably fall in your way? Will you stand up and show us what you're made of? Plenty of people have answered this question in the affirmative, and a rarer breed still have shown that not only they have what it takes, but they thrive and rally at such a challenge. That challenge makes them better than if they had never faced the adversity at all. And then we're going to jump over to the introduction. So it says there on page 1, which we're going from 13 to 1. Nice. Let's be honest. Most of us are paralyzed. Whatever our individual goals, most of us sit frozen before many obstacles that lie ahead of us. So we blame our bosses, the economy, our politicians, and other people, when really the only thing that is at fault is our attitude and approach. Many of us are disoriented, reactive, and torn. We have no idea what to do. On the other hand, not everyone is paralyzed. We watch in awe as some turn those very obstacles which stymie us into launching pads for themselves. What do these figures have that we lack? And then on the next page, some men and women faced unimaginable horrors, from imprisonment to debilitating illnesses. Subject to those pressures, these individuals were transformed. They were transformed along the lines of Andy Grove, former CEO of Intel, as he outlined when he described what happens to businesses in tumultuous times. Bad companies are destroyed by crisis. Good companies survive them. Great companies are improved by them. And then jumping to page 5. So this will be a book on how to turn the many negative situations we encounter in our lives into positive ones, or at least to snatch whatever benefit we can from them, to steal the good fortune from the misfortune. And then jumping to page 8. All great victories, be they in politics, business, art, or seduction, involved vexing problems with a potent cocktail of creativity, focus, and daring. When you have a goal, obstacles are actually teaching you how to get where you want to go, carving you a path. The things which hurt, Benjamin Franklin wrote, instruct. Today, most of our obstacles are internal, not external. Many of our problems come from having too much rapid technological disruption, junk food, traditions that tell us the way we're supposed to live our lives. Abundance can be its own obstacle, as many people can attest. And then he concludes with the way through them, and he gives 3 things. 1, which is perception, or put differently, objective judgment now at this very moment, and then action, unselfish action now at this very moment, and last, willing acceptance now at this very moment of all external events. That's what you need. And he attributes that to Marcus Aurelius. I don't know if it's a direct translated quote or if it's like a paraphrased quote, but he says that these are the obstacles. These are the 3 critical steps to basically overcoming obstacles. And that's also what the book is centered around. This perception, action, and will. Yeah. Peter, I don't know if you have any thoughts or remarks on those initial parts.
Most of those, things that you covered, but just maybe also just highlight a few. It's just, I think on page 14 or in the Roman numerals, that is, it talks about the impediment of to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Again, I did mention earlier, it's just a way in which this book has just reframed or framed certain things that really stood out. It's just kind of having a different view on obstacles. And again, like the three ways that you touched on there on the end, how it breaks it down, that for every obstacle, there's a perspective of looking at it, then the action and then the will that follows after. And then, I mean, that's how the book is essentially broken up. And I think, that's what we're going to discuss. And I mean, something that also was interesting to me was on page 3, from the Intel, the former Intel CEO, about how bad companies are destroyed by crisis, good companies survive them, great companies are improved by them. And, in the same way, that's how, we apply it to life. And I mean, it even goes further, about how there are companies that were founded during financial depressions, we almost said most people didn't want to do anything. Most people didn't see that as a problem and carried on doing what it was. And in the end, the company survived through that, so that as well. And I think that's covered in the perception of things, that they perceived it as not a problem to them in that particular moment and forged on.
Yeah.
And in the end, kind of, didn't see that as an obstacle at all, but yet the general population thought of it as an obstacle. But just, and because I feel like I'll keep on and on. Those are the things I wanted to add. Then we can jump in, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, just before we go on, I think that one thing for me is just so Ryan Holiday, he has a thing called the Daily Stoic, and he deals a lot with Stoicism, and often he speaks about Marcus Aurelius and his book The Meditations, and that's kind of what he touches on in the beginning, and it's just an impressive thing to see a person like Marcus Aurelius, who was one of the most powerful people at his time, or in his time, and yet he was still able to seemingly control himself. He was still human and so on, but he had a incredible level of almost discipline and a way of perceiving the world and acting in the world that seems to be quite admirable. But cool. I think we can then carry on to the next part, perception. So we just went through obviously the introduction, and now we're going to do the 3 different pieces: perception, action, and will. All right. So perception. What is perception? It's how we see and understand what occurs around us and what we decide those events will mean. To prevent becoming overwhelmed by the world around us, we must, as the ancients practiced, learn how to limit our passions and their control over our lives. That's page 11, and then going to the next part, page 13, the discipline of perception. The young Rockefeller took his first job in 1855 at the age of 16, a day he celebrated as Job Day for the rest of his life. Then the panic struck, specifically the Panic of 1857, a massive financial crisis that originated in Ohio. Rockefeller could have been scared. There was a great market depression. It was the greatest market depression in history, and it hit him as he was finally getting the hang of things. Instead of bemoaning this economic upheaval, Rockefeller eagerly observed the momentous events. Then on page 14, he internalized an important lesson that would stay with him forever. The market was inherently unpredictable and often vicious. Only a rational and disciplined mind could hope to profit from it. Speculation led to disaster, he realized, and he needed to always ignore the mad crowd and its inclinations. Then towards the bottom, within 20 years of that first crisis, Rockefeller alone would control 90% of the oil market. Then on the next page, for the rest of his life, the greater the chaos, the calmer Rockefeller would become, particularly when others around him were either panicked or mad with greed. He would make much of his fortune during the times of these market fluctuations. And then further down, was he born this way? No. This was learnt behavior, and Rockefeller got this lesson in discipline somewhere. It began in the crisis of 1857, in what he called the school of adversity and stress. He said, "Oh, how blessed a young man who have to struggle for the foundation and beginning of his life." He once said, "I shall never cease to be grateful for the 3.5 years of apprenticeship and the difficulties to be overcome all along the way." Then jumping to page 17, we have a choice about how we respond to a situation, or any situation for that matter. We can be blindly led by these primal feelings, or we can understand and learn to filter them. Discipline in preparation lets you see clearly the advantage and the proper course of action in every situation, without a pestilence of panic or fear. And then jumping to the next chapter, recognize your power. Choose not to be harmed, and you will not feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. That's by Marcus Aurelius. And then Ryan writes, Reuben Hurricane Carter, top contender for the middleweight title at the height of his boxing career in the mid-1960s, was wrongly accused of a horrific crime he did not commit, a triple homicide. Then on the next page, it took 19 years and 2 trials to overturn the verdict, but when Carter walked out of prison, he simply resumed his life. No civil suit to recover damages. Carter didn't even request an apology from the court, because to him that would imply that they took something of his that Carter felt he was owed. And that has never been his view, even in the dark depths of solitary confinement. Then on page 21, our perceptions are the thing that we're in complete control of. Then a bit further down, to one person a situation may be negative, to another the same situation may be positive. Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, as Shakespeare put it. And then jumping to steady your nerves. What such a man needs is not courage, but nerve control, cool-headedness. This can only be gotten by practice. That's by Theodore Roosevelt. I'm gonna pause there. What are your thoughts, Peter?
So with that, I think I have a bit to touch on the two. In terms of the first, I was on to say chapter, but first section in this part about the discipline of perception, the opener, there were many stories that spoke about of Rockefeller there, and again, it did attribute to discipline. There was apparently a time where, if I recall correctly, oil was sort of booming at the time, and investors sort of gave him money to go explore certain wells and stuff, and then he came back with the investors' money and decided not to, and subsequently everyone that kind of invested at that time sort of, I think things fell through, or something along those lines.
Yeah, even though the investors, normally people would just take the money, he gave it back to the investors. He gave it back, like you said, and the investors were like, what on earth is going on?
And again, I think you even read that part to be like, it wasn't always like that. It's like through lessons of doing different things along the way, did he have that discipline, or was able to frame things, or able to know that, okay, this is the right time for me to invest, this is not, And I mean, that took him a long way, you know. And again, it looks at other people. So, and again, it did say in the beginning of, you need to see some obstacles as opportunities, but also you need to know when to, I think, distinguish the two, to be like, okay, this is really something that I need to stay away or ride it out, you know. And then moving on to recognize your power. I think that was that story alone, like, I don't know if that's something I would do, because I mean, he remained true to his innocence from day one. I mean, remember they said, like, after he was even sentenced and was taken to jail, he refused to let go of his possessions, you know. And not only that, he said, you're not going to put me with the rest of them because I am innocent, you know. And to further go on to say that it actually took him 19 years to gain his freedom. And again, it says recognize your power. For him to say, and I think that's what they were trying to paint in that section of the book, to be like, an obstacle doesn't really define who you are, you know. Because remember, when he was then released, he was like, he didn't even try fight it and whatnot. His thing was like, okay, those were 19 years I've lost. What can I do to move forward from this and carry on? You know, and again, like, I don't think we all have that strength. I personally know I don't. And luckily I've never found myself in that position. But yeah, that story alone was just, incredible. To be like, not every obstacle results into doom. Yes, it might be terrible at the time or while going through it, but it can be a stepping stone for something else.
Yeah, I think the quote from Marcus there, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed, don't feel harmed and you haven't been. I think it's a very difficult but I think good mindset to be able to try and adopt. And like this Carter guy, where he, like you say, when he got out of prison, he didn't react and sort of go after people that basically got him into the situation. He was just like, okay, if I'm not gonna feel harmed by the situation, even though it took 19 years of his life, then he's not harmed by it and he can just carry on with his life. And his life after getting out of prison is probably better for it. And even inside of prison, he seemingly used it as a training ground for law and things like that, for helping him, which, I think is an extremely difficult thing to do. But if you can get to that, as Ryan would put it, if you can have that perception of the world, because this whole section is about perception. If you can have that perception of the world, then that will help you go forward without getting stuck up and hung up on things. Alright, should we go on to the next 4? So control your emotions. So starting on page 27, control your emotions. And then it's got a quote from Publius Serious. Do you want a great empire? Rule over yourself. And then Ryan starts. When America raced to send the first men to space, they trained the astronauts in one skill more than any other, the art of not panicking. Then on page 29, thus the question for astronauts was not how skilled a pilot are you, but can you keep your uneven strain? Can you fight the urge to panic instead focus only on what you can change, on the task at hand? And then going to page 31. Or try Marcus's question. Does what happened to you keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, straightforwardness? And then jumping to the next chapter, practice objectivity. Don't let the force of an impression, when it first hit you, knock you off your feet. Just say to it, hold on a moment. Let me see who you are and what you represent. Let me put you to the test. And that's Epictetus. The phrase "this happened and it's is bad." Sorry, the phrase "this happened and is bad" is actually two impressions. The first, that this happened, is objective. The second, it's bad, is subjective. Then on page 33, everything about our animalistic brains tries to compress the space between impression and perception. We can question that impulse, we can disagree with it, we can override the switch, examine the threat before we act. But this takes strength. It's a muscle that must be developed, and muscles are developed by tension and lifting and holding. And then page 34. It is so much better to see things as they truly are, not as we've made them in our minds. Take your situation and pretend it's not happening to you. Pretend it's not important, that it doesn't matter. How much easier would it be for you to know what to do? And then a bit further down, the more you try, the better you get at it. The more skilled you become at seeing things for what they really are, the more perception will work for you rather than against you. Then going to page 36, which is the next chapter, alter your perspective. Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become in the next moment. By the same token, every human being has the freedom to change at any moment. And that's a quote from Viktor Frankl. Then on page 37, remember, we choose how we look at things. We retain the ability to inject perspective into any situation. We can't change the obstacles themselves. That part of the equation is set. But the power of perspective can change how obstacles appear, how we approach, view, and contextualize an obstacle. And what we tell ourselves it means determines how daunting, and how trying it will be to overcome. But further down, the right perspective has a strange way of cutting obstacles and adversity down to size. We kick ourselves for blowing a deal or having missed a meeting. Individually, that does suck. We missed 100% of that opportunity. What we're forgetting in that instance, as billionaire and serial entrepreneur Richard Branson likes to say, is that business opportunities are like buses. There's always another one coming around. And then lastly, the next section or chapter is It's Up to You. And that's starting on page 40. In life, our first job is this, to divide and distinguish things into two categories. Externals I cannot control, but the choices I make with regard to them I do control. Where I will find good and bad in me, in my choices. And that's by Epictetus. And then on page 41, during the middle of 1974, the season when Tommy John, which he's a baseball player, he's apparently a very good baseball player and had a long career. During that season, Tommy blew out his arm and permanently damaged the collateral ligament. They called it a dead arm injury. Game over. John wouldn't accept it. And basically it carries on to say that he had surgery, or he couldn't get surgery, but then there was an experimental surgery and he said, okay, let me try it because at least there was a chance. And then he carried on to win 164 more games over the next 13 seasons. And then eventually in 1988, it seemed like his baseball career was really over because the team, the Yankees, decided not to, they basically decided to cut him. And then he was like, no, I'm just going to try and show up. And he basically spoke to them and said, can I try and if I do well enough, then will you take me on again? And then he pushed really hard, and eventually they ended up taking him on, and he carried on apparently doing great things. And then to end off on page 43, to argue, to complain, or worse, just to give up, these are choices. Choices that more often than not do nothing to get us across the finish line. So yeah, what are your thoughts on those four, Peter?
Yeah, also a lot that we've covered there, but I mean, starting from controlling your emotions, yeah, I mean, again, we faced with anything, you know. I mean, it talks about the astronauts that they were taught not to panic. It wasn't about as much as they required skills to do certain things, you know, to fly the craft and all that kind of stuff. But there were certain things that, you know, they needed to possess, and one of which was how they react to certain thing, and in this case, not to panic when, you know, they can't differentiate between up and down, essentially, you know. And then also, I think you read this about the question that Marcus poses, you know, does what happens keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, and straightforwardness? Nope. Then get back to work, you know, it continues. You know, I think so often we use certain things that we face as an excuse to do what it is, but in all essence, we're the ones that paralyze ourselves by overthinking situations and stuff. But in essence, we just have to carry ourselves and carry on, I guess, you know. So that was my some of the thoughts from that section. And then for practice objectivity, what stood out to me there was the one part which I think it was, I think, also a reality check for me about how we're always so good at giving others advice, you know, because we not that closely linked to the problem at hand, the obstacle at hand. You know, we able to visualize what that person's solution is, what they can act in that instance. But now, when the table's turned, you know, again, like I said, we then paralyze whatever we face. But again, we need to be equally as objective, you know. When we find ourselves in those positions. I mean, funny enough, I had an interesting conversation with someone I just met. So I went for some paddle event that was organized by people I know, and there's someone that, I mean, I never met. It's usually a lot of strangers that get together, play paddle and stuff, but we went out after that to grab food and drinks, and I remember, you know, when someone starts saying things that you're like, okay, who sent you? Because it's like you're giving me, you know, advice that, not really advice, but you're saying things that, you know, honestly, I would react to something, but I'm like, okay, maybe, you know, being a Christian, I'm like, okay, maybe God sent this person, you know, to speak to me. Let me just be calm and listen. But then he took like a turn on what he was saying to kind of be like, for instance, if you have a friend that you've noticed is drinking a lot more, and you also drink, but then you're telling them like, oh, please slow down. And then they hit you back with, but you also do the same thing. You know, they need to also realize that maybe there is something you've seen that the pretty much self-sabotage might continue going that path and to listen. You know, and I got where I was coming from, but I was like, I know personally when I'm doing something, or rather I'm sharing something and someone goes, but why? But I know they do the same exact, I feel some type of way. You know, I become very resistant, but I understood what it meant. And again, going back to the practice of objectivity, is like you kind of have a better view on someone's life, you know, to say, okay, that decision isn't the best for you right now. And if they're friend enough, you then step up to say it. But so often, instead of us actually listening with intent and be welcoming to what they're saying, we easily defend ourselves because, you know, so it was just interesting to be like, I had to also take a step back to sort of like, from that conversation, also reading this, to be like, I guess as much as we closely linked or a situation being ours, sometimes you kind of need to have an outside perspective of it, and maybe only then can you sit clear for what it is and find a solution for it. Again, like the book is trying to say, the obstacle is not really a stumbling block, you know, it's not a blocker, you know, it just allows you to think about things a little different, and that then becomes the path in the end, you know, the obstacle itself. Not much to add about altering your perspective, but that's also something that the right perspective as a stranger of cutting obstacles, you know, like it's about reframing, you know. I think it takes me back to, I think, Atomic Habits, where I know I always butcher this wrong, but it's the whole thing of when you're trying to quit something and you're asked, like, and I mean the example I think was smoking, to be like
the identity thing,
the identity thing. And I feel like this is the same thing, because it's like the moment you identify with that obstacle, I mean, it talks about, you say it as, I hate public speaking, like the moment you include yourself in it, then it's harder for you to sort of fight against it, to use that loosely, but to overcome that obstacle, you know. You kind of have to not identify as whatever it is, let's say, you're trying to stop, you know, like, yes, you don't say, I'm a smoker trying to quit, you know, you're like, you know, I quit smoking, you know, like, use words that kind of,
I'm not a smoker,
solidify whatever habit, or whatever, in this case, whatever obstacle you're sort of trying to identify with. And then the last part of is it up to you? I mean, that story as well was, I think just as powerful as the one of the boxer, to be like, you know, not being ready to give up, you know, takes you a long way, you know.
Just keeping on going.
You know, it's up to you. You either say, I am doing this, going through this, or I'm not, you know. Those are my thoughts.
I think this is more of like a summary thought, but on page 32 it talks about the this happened and is bad, and separating those out into two impressions. The one is objective, that something happened, and the other that it's subjective, that it's bad. And I think we'll hear it a lot in this book, but that subjective thought of like, this thing is bad, we often think is just an objective thought, like it's a thought that's just factual. But it's not like that. And if we try and approach the view correctly, so as a lot of the Stoics would say, kind of separating the impressions from things that are in our control and things that are outside of our control. And something that's in our control is our emotions for the most part. There's the whole How Emotions Are Made book, which, we can go back to that at some point. But the point is that we can choose how we want to react to things, or at least slowly build up the way that we react to situations. And then if you look at someone like Viktor Frankl, which is a sort of extreme example of that, you can end up in a situation where you can find hope even in the most dire of situations. And so finding that perspective, altering your perspective to be able to do that, I think is an extremely powerful thing. And then it gets to the baseball part, and when it's like, you can just keep trying. And sometimes that's not a good idea, but often, probably more often than we think, it's actually you can carry on playing, or whatever the case is. Yeah. Okay, should we go to the next 4?
Yep.
Starting on page 45. Live in the present moment is the chapter title. It says, do yourself a favor and run down the list of businesses that started during depressions or economic crises. Then it lists a large number of well-known businesses, including things like Microsoft and Procter & Gamble and a bunch of different things. And then on page 46 it says, the point is that most people start from disadvantage, often with no idea that they are doing so, and they do just fine. That's not unfair, it's universal. Those who survive it survive because they took things day by day, and that's the real secret. And on page 47, for all species other than humans, things are what they are. Our problem is that we're always trying to figure out what they mean, why they are the way that they are, as though the why matters. Emerson put it best, we cannot spend the day in explanation. Don't waste time on false constructs. And then, jumping to the next chapter, think differently. Page 49. Steve Jobs was famous for what observers called his reality distortion field. Part motivational tactic, part sheer drive and ambition. His field made him notoriously dismissive of phrases such as, it cannot be done, or we need more time. For instance, in the design stage for a new mouse for an early Apple product, Jobs had higher expectations. He wanted it to move fluidly in any direction. But a lead engineer was told by one of his designers that this would be commercially impossible. What Jobs wanted wasn't realistic and wouldn't work. The next day, the lead engineer arrived at work to find that Steve Jobs had fired that employee who had said that. When the replacement came in, his words were, I can build the mouse. This was Jobs' view of reality at work. Then a bit further down, he knew that to aim low meant to accept mediocre accomplishment, but a high aim could find things right, could, if things went right, create something extraordinary. Our perceptions determine to an incredibly large degree what we are and are not capable of. In many ways, they determine reality itself. Then on page 51, I'm not going to read it, but they give another example of the Macintosh engineers and how they didn't think that they could make it in time, and then they were supposed to do it in 2 weeks, or they wanted 2 weeks, and then Steve said the deadline's basically in 1 week, and it doesn't really make too much of a difference, 1 week or 2 weeks, and then they realized they could actually do it, and they did it. Then on page 53, this is the next chapter, Finding the Opportunity. A good person dyes events with his own color and turns whatever happens to his own benefit. And then page 57. The struggle against an obstacle inevitably propels the fighter to a new level of functioning. The extent of the struggle determines the extent of the growth. The obstacle is an advantage, not adversity. The enemy is any perception that prevents us from seeing this. And then lastly, this is actually the last chapter of this part 1 called Perception, and its chapter is Prepare to Act. Problems are rarely as bad as we think, or rather, they are precisely as bad as we think. The proper perception, objective, rational, ambitious, clean, isolates the obstacle and exposes it for what it is. Now that you've managed perceptions properly, what's next is to act. So yeah, what are your thoughts, Peter?
I mean, paddling back about living in the present moment, I think it was something that I said during the intro about, it talks about how these are the companies that started during depression or economic crisis. And I mean, again, like I said, that was naturally, when you hear about that, you'd think people won't want to start, companies. And I mean, like you said, it's big companies, Microsoft, LinkedIn are grouped into that, General Motors. So yeah, that was interesting. That, in that moment, the founders didn't think to stop, but rather they were just more concerned or more focused at the objective at hand, And then, there was the section that you read. Okay, before I get to that, is that the point is that most people start from disadvantage, and do just fine. That I think is something that we need to remember. I think myself, it's just that, we just need to go on, I guess, and then still on page 46, for the most part, these businesses are little awareness. They were in some historic significant depression. Why? Because the founders were too busy existing in the present. So just moving back to be like, they were just focused at the task at hand, And then 47, for all species other than us humans, things, things just are what they are. Our problem is that we're always trying to figure out what things mean. That is, again, instead of just do it, it's like you want to break down things, and kind of probably scare yourself more from what the thing actually may be,
I find that one interesting because it's something where we read the whole book on it, literally, Why, by Simon Sinek, and his whole thing is like, you need to know your why, right? But even Ryan Holiday, I think it's late in the book, I might be misremembering, but I think he talks about using why as a motivation almost, and it's funny how it's always some mixture. It's never like clear cut, because this part is kind of saying like a lot of our problems come from the fact that we just keep on reflecting on this, like different things, like why are things like this, and I think that can be a trap, but it can also be a trap to never think about why you're doing something, or the bigger why. So I find it interesting. And the disadvantage thing as well, I think obviously there's nuance there. I agree with what he said. But there's different types of disadvantage. But I think his core point of like people, there's tons of people that go through difficult situations and come out the other side stronger for it. So don't let disadvantage be your excuse at whichever sort of level it's at. But yeah, there's nuance there. I will leave it at that.
Yeah, and then lastly from that section is that one thing is said, and it's not simply a matter of saying, "Oh, I'll live in the present." You have to work at it. Cut your mind when it wanders. I think that I think just to close off that section, about live in the present moment. Yeah, and then think differently. I mean, yeah, you did cover most of the stories there, and I think those also stood out to me. I mean, the essence of the guy saying that can't be done to, next day he's out of a job, a little harsh, kind of would have thought he would be spoken to, told never to do that again. But I guess, that what's that? I mean, we have a saying in our language that if one fish is rotten, it means the rest of the fish is also gone bad. So kind of you don't want one fish sort of poisoning everyone else.
What is the saying?
No, it's kind of.
I mean, like in your language.
It doesn't work. No, it's more of sombega ole modzi zawalazose, which means literally the literal translation.
I'll remember that. No. But I won't remember the fish thing.
Yes. Those are. I think. Let me. Yeah, those were the highlights, and I think just to end it, just one of the last things here about Prepare to Act, about problems are really as bad as we think, or rather they're precisely as bad as we think. I think that those are just some of the things I wanted to add.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, then we're going to move to part 2, which is about action. So it was perception, now action, and then the last one is going to be will. And that starts with the preface on page 63, where it says, "What is action? Action is commonplace. Right action is not. As a discipline, it's not any kind of action that will do, but directed action. We must be sure to act with deliberation, boldness, and persistence. Those are the attributes of right and effective action. Nothing else, not thinking or evasion or aid from others. Action is the solution and the cure to our predicaments." And then jumping to page 65, which is another chapter, or the first chapter of this part. The discipline of action. There was little evidence that Demosthenes was destined to become the greatest orator of Athens. At 7 years old, he lost his father, and then things got worse. A large inheritance left to him, intended to pay for his tutors and the best schools, was stolen by the guardians entrusted to protect him. Here he was, fatherless, effeminate, an awkward child, who no one understood, everyone laughed at. Not exactly the boy you'd expect to soon hold the power to mobilize a nation to war by his voice alone. Then on page 66, stuck in his mind at youth was the image of becoming a great orator. A man he'd once witnessed speaking at the court of Athens was a great orator. And then a little bit further down, so he did something about it. To conquer his speech impediment, he devised his own strange exercises. He would fill his mouth with pebbles and practice speaking. He rehearsed full speeches into the wind while running up steep inclines, and so on. And then, a bit later, or further down, when he came of age, he finally filed suits against the negligent guardians who had wronged him. They evaded his efforts and hired lawyers, but he refused to be stopped. Flexible and creative, he matched them suit for suit and delivered countless speeches, confident in his new strengths and driven by his own toil. They were no match. Demosthenes eventually won. Only a fraction of the original inheritance remained, but his reputation as an orator ability to command a crowd, and his perilous knowledge of the intricacies of the law was worth more than whatever remained of a once great fortune. And then further down, some academic once asked Demosthenes what the three most important traits of speech making were. His reply says it all: action, action, action. And then going to the next part, get moving, on page 71. Next chapter. We must all wear out, we must all either wear out or rust out, every one of us. My choice is to wear out. That's Theodore Roosevelt. Amelia Earhart wanted to be a great aviator, but in the 1920s, people still thought of women as frail and weak, and that they didn't have the stuff. She couldn't make her living as a pilot, so she took a job as a social worker. Then one day the phone rang. The man on the phone had a pretty offensive proposition. Then it explains the proposition, and then it says, "Do you know what she said to the offer?" She said, "Yes." And then on the next page, as it went for Amelia Earhart, less than 5 years later, she was the first woman to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic and became, rightly, one of the most famous and respected people in the world. But none of that would have happened had she turned up her nose at the offensive offer or sat around feeling sorry for herself. And then jumping to page 75. Just as Eckhart did, all the greats you admire started by saying, "Yes, let's go." And they usually did it in less desirable circumstances than we will ever suffer. Just because the conditions aren't exactly to your liking, or you don't feel ready yet, doesn't mean that you get a pass. And then one more chapter, practice persistence. And jumping to page 78. In 1878, Thomas Edison wasn't the only person experimenting with incandescent lights, but he was the only man willing to test 6,000 different filaments. And of course, he eventually found it, proving that genius rarely is just persistence in disguise. Edison had outlasted impatient competitors, investors, and the press to discover in a piece of bamboo, of all things, the power to illuminate the world. And yeah, that's I think it for the first part of part 2. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Not much. You sort of covered most things there, but just poorly just repeat the title. So the discipline of action. I mean, that story of Demosthenes, literally he acted all along, from, apparently having a speech impediment to being one of the greatest speech deliverers. And his action was speaking with pebbles in his mouth. Interesting when I heard that, but but it's just I think that's also an indication to be an obstacle can seem a big deal now, but you can throw anything at it and sort of overcome it, not let that be something to stop you, I think we so often see obstacles as a no instead of a try again, or you can move past this. And then moving on to get moving, that in itself, that story as well, to be women were not not seen as qualified to fly, and then the proposition, I don't know if you read it, I don't think you covered, but the proposition is that she literally would just sit on, but again,
I just sit on the sidelines.
If she had said no to that, essentially, she wouldn't have gotten to the point where she would have been trusted to fly solo. She sort of broke that barrier and sort of paved the way. And I think one other thing I had a note in that section was on page 74, where it says, for some reason these days we tend to downplay the importance of aggression, of taking risk, of barreling forward. It's probably because it's been negatively associated with certain notions of violence and or masculinity, you know. And I mean that's it's sad because I mean my view is that certain things are always seen as negative, you know. If you try to be the one stepping up, you know, let's say as a man in a female dominated field, you know, that would be said as you exercising your masculinity on them. But sometimes you just have to do it, you know. It's not out of bad intent, but society has just deemed it as so. Same as, you know, taking risks. It's always seen as done out of aggression, but essentially you have to take that leap at the end of the day. And then just...
Yeah, I think So, no, carry on.
No, I was moving on, so you can add something there.
No, I think just for the Earhart part, I think it's especially the part where they talk about people like Earhart starting in less desirable circumstances than we'll probably ever suffer, is a helpful one to remember, because we often want to make excuses for the situation isn't ideal, or that's beneath me, or whatever the case is. But both we saw with a bunch of different people, including Earhart, that they whatever they thought in their minds, they didn't seem to portray the fact that this was offensive to them. And I would think that even to the extent of possibly a lot of them didn't even take offense to it, because it's just like, okay, like this is just the way that things are. I'm going to do what I can. And it's kind of that Stoic principle again of what is in my control and what isn't in my control. And I'm not going to let the same as that guy who was convicted, Carter, I think his name was, who was convicted of the murders. It's some things are in my control and some things are out of my control, but the situation, I'm not going to let it affect me. And if I haven't done anything wrong or this or that, then I know that, and I'm going to carry on holding strong. Or with Earhart, it's a similar thing where I'm going to carry on the course that I want to go down and take any opportunity, as menial as it seems. I'm going to take the opportunity, because that sort of makes one step closer almost. Shame is it a kid?
Yeah.
In the back.
Yeah, in the passageway. It's prime playtime. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's super true. You can carry on.
Yeah, and then I think the last thing I wanted to add was from practice persistence. I think on page 78 it says, and of course he eventually found it, proving that genius often really is just persistence in disguise. You know, it's but it took tries. I mean it talks about Thomas Edison finding the light filament. It's like he had to try several things until he found
only several.
I don't want to say a lot.
Several thousand. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the persistence thing is something where we always think, I mean, the Edison one is used a lot as an example because it's just so dramatic. But we often give up after like one try, never mind even 3 tries. 6,000 or however many it was is just, I don't actually even think that one can realize just how much effort that is.
Yeah.
It's almost unfathomable. But yeah. Okay, we're going to go for the next 4. So starting with iterate on page 82. It says, a quote by Wendell Phillips. What is defeat? Nothing but education. Nothing but the first steps to something better. Then Ryan says, in Silicon Valley, startups don't launch with a polished, finished business. Instead, they release a minimum viable product, the most basic version of their core idea with only 1 or 2 essential features. The point is to immediately see how customers respond, and if the response is poor, to be able to fail cheaply and quickly, to avoid making or investing in a product customers don't want. As engineers now quip, failure is a feature, but it's no joke. Failure really can be an asset to what you're trying to improve, learn, or when you're doing something new. It's the preceding feature of nearly all success. And then on page 83, on the path to successful action, we will fail, possibly many times, and that's okay. And then going to page 87, the next little chapter, follow the process. Coach Nick Saban doesn't actually refer to it very often, but every one of his assistants and players lives it. Just 2 words were responsible for their unprecedented success. The process. And then it says he teaches the process, and it gives a quote from him. Don't think about winning the SCE championship. Don't think about the national championship. Think about what you need to do in this drill, on this play, in this moment. That's the process. Let's think about what we can do today, the task at hand. In the chaos of sport, as in life, the process provides a way. And then on page 89, when it comes to our actions, disorder and distraction are death. The unordered mind loses track of what's in front of it, what matters, and gets distracted by thoughts of the future. The process is order. It keeps our perceptions in check and reality and our actions in sync. And then on page 91, we are A to Z thinkers, fretting about A, obsessing over Z, yet forgetting about B through Y. And then going to page 93, do your job and do it right. Then the quote from Sir Henry Royce, whatever is rightly done, however humble, is noble. And then on page 94, often when we're just starting out, our first jobs introduce us to the broom, as Andrew Carnegie famously put it. There's nothing shameful about sweeping. It's just another opportunity to excel and learn. But you're not so busy thinking about the future. You're so busy thinking about the future, you don't take any pride in the tasks you're given right now. You just phone it all in, cash your paycheck, and dream of some higher station in life. Or you think, this is just a job, it isn't who I am, it doesn't matter. And then he writes, foolishness. And then on page 95, each project matters. The only degrading part is giving less than one is capable of giving. We'll be and do many things in our lives. None are beneath us. Work hard, honestly, and help others as best we can. And then on page 96, Steve Jobs cared even about the inside of his products, making sure that they were beautifully designed, even though users would never see them. Taught by his father, who finished even the back of his cabinets, although they would be hidden against a wall. Think like a craftsman. And then the next one is on 101. What's right is what works. So he says, pragmatism is not so much realism as flexibility. There are a lot of ways to get from point A to B. It doesn't have to be a straight line. It's just got to get you to where you need to go. But so many of us spend so much time looking for the perfect solution. that we pass up what's right in front of us. The Stoics had their own reminder: don't go expecting Plato's Republic. The first iPhone was revolutionary, but it still shipped without a copy and paste feature, or a handful of other features Apple would have liked to included. Steve Jobs, the supposed perfectionist, knew that at some point you have to compromise. And then lastly, on page 102, think progress, not perfection. I think I'll pause there. What are your thoughts, Peter?
There's I think a lot in that section. But yeah, some of the things that stood out to me, I think, going back to iterate, there's the whole, and that means changing the relationship with failure. It means iterating, failing, and improving. Our capacity to try is inextricably linked to our ability to tolerance to fail. That section alone was kind of like you have to go through the process over and over again, and you're expected to fail and then try what's possible, but again, that opening was like, that comes from us changing our perception of failure. And going back to the previous point that you made about how we fail once and we move on, yet Thomas Edison 6,000 times till he got it, and then moving on, it's like, when failure does come, ask, what went wrong here? What can be improved, and what am I missing? This helps birth alternative ways of doing what needs to be done, ways that are often much better than what we started with. Failure puts you in a corner you have to think your way out of. It is a source of breakthroughs. So, that I think was also, something very vital. Again, about seeing, changing our relationship with failure. Failure doesn't mean the end, And I remember, I think one of the books we read earlier this year, I don't know if it was earlier this year or it was the end of last year, about compound effect. It talks about how, yes, there are those fortunate people that succeed the first time they do something, but so often success comes from having failed, at many things, and actually from that drawing what actually works to kind of come up with a successful business, or idea. And then moving on, it's like, the one way to guarantee we don't benefit from failure is to ensure it is a bad thing. It is to not learn from it, to continue to try the same thing over and over. And again, we often joke about this, that's stupidity, is trying the same thing over and over, the same thing that fails. So this also says, to benefit from it, you have to learn from it. We need to learn from our failures, And then in the end, it says, we turn what would otherwise be disappointing into opportunity. Failure shows us the way by showing us what is in the way, So, those are some things. And then moving on to follow the process. It reads, I think you read most of part of this, but it says, okay, you've got to do something very differently. Don't focus on that. Instead, break it down into pieces. Simply do what you need to do right now and do it well, and then move on to the next thing. Follow this process and not the price. So it's, the process is about breaking things through, or breaking things down, rather. And then further down it says, the process is about finishing games, finishing workouts, finishing film sessions, finishing drives, finishing reps, finishing plays, finishing blocks, finishing the smallest task you have right in front of you, and finishing it well. I think those are even closely related, but it's about finishing. And to start, most people don't even start at all. They think of an obstacle like, why should they even bother? And again, I think you did touch on this. I won't reread it, but it's about things being A to Z, but then we kind of just want the A and the Z and kind of skip the in between, but yet the in between is actually what's really important, And then to close off that, it says the process is about doing the right thing right now, not worrying about what might happen later or the result of the whole picture, I know so often it was like, oh, look at the bigger picture, but you have to break it down as well. To get the whole picture, you have to break it down,
there's always that mixture. It's and that whole section reminds me of the book The Practice, where basically it's just about taking one step after the other consistently and following the process. And that's what leads to a successful outcome. But we often do end up focusing so much on achieving the end goal rather than just doing what we are supposed to do right now, as sometimes is said, just doing our job. And that's why it's so much easier to be in a job and do productive work rather than starting your own thing. Because when you're starting your own thing, you think about the end result often, which is the dangerous thing. You should be thinking about, okay, what's the next step that I should take? Whereas in a job, you often end up thinking, sometimes there's small little, like, projects that you're trying to accomplish, but in large part, you're just focused on, like, what am I doing right now? But both things are helpful and important. It's just too often with things that we want to achieve, we end up focusing on the end goal.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I think with do your job, do it right, I think what stood out there was the story about Steve Jobs' father actually also finishing the back of cabinets, even though they were not even going to be seen, and then further down it says right action, unselfish, dedicated, masterful, creative. That is the answer to the question. That's one way to find the meaning of life and how to turn every obstacle into an opportunity. Anything else? I think most of that you covered. I think maybe just just like what's right and what works. I think one thing is on page 102. I think you read part of it, but it says don't think small, but make the distinction between the critical and the extra. Think process, not perfection. And at this kind of force, obstacles break apart. They have no choice. Since you're going around them or making them irrelevant, there's nothing for them to resist. It's again, just going back to what I said in the beginning. I really enjoyed this book in the sense that it kind of reframes obstacles, or challenges, in life. Like, so often, like, think about, like, worrying, for instance. We worry about things that haven't even occurred, and, like, they get to a point where we paralyzed by them, get anxious, stress, and this is just through thinking and not results. When results come, we're disappointed but not really stressed or anxious about things, so I think I'll stop there and let you continue.
I don't have too much to add other than just on what you said now. It's funny, Jamie, I was talking to her about just feeling under pressure at work, and I was thinking, like, is it a good thing or a bad thing, and things like that. And then she said something which I think is true, which is that it's a bit of both as well. I know that I've said that a lot this podcast, but because you like, you don't want to always be stressed about things, because then to put it frankly, you might die early. It's not good for your body, and you also just won't enjoy things as much. But to never feel pressure is also probably not a good thing, as I think we've learned in this book, where it's like the obstacle, that pressure often is the thing that's needed to get us to like, I mean, if you look at the Steve Jobs examples, a lot of it is him in his reality distortion field putting pressure on people to be like, no, you can do this, like, trust me, you can do this, and then it's like, oh wow, I can do that. And then but if they hadn't had that pressure from him, and it's an interesting one as well to think about, because I don't like the style of management where people put pressure. Like, I probably would not do well under Steve, not because I think that the pressure isn't helpful, but because of the extreme nature of the way that he seems to have put it on people. It's the same as Elon. Like, I just think it's incredible what he's done, all kinds of things, but the amount of pressure that he puts is a bit too much, I think. But I think it's a helpful thing. And then lastly, just like the idea of any of the actions that you take in that section. What does it start with? I'll get the quote now. Whatever is done rightly, however humble, is noble. And I think that it talks about Dale Carnegie saying, or the saying that he says, often when we're just starting out, our first jobs introduce us to the broom, as Andrew Carnegie. That's interesting. I just assumed Dale Carnegie. That's funny. As he famously put it, there's nothing shameful about sweeping. It's just another opportunity to learn and excel. And I think it's similar to what we spoke about earlier, where we think things are beneath us, but if you take the right perspective, then you will perform actions in the right way. You will, if your perspective is, oh, this is just another thing that I can excel at, then you will act in the right way towards that thing. But if your perception is wrong, then you'll be like, I don't want to do this. Why do I have to do this? This is not what I want. And then obviously you won't do well. All right, before we run out of time, should we go to the next section, in praise of the flank attack? Okay, so I'm gonna read through, I think, the next 5. So starting on 105. When you're at your wits' end, straining and straining with all your might, take a step back, then go around the problem, find the leverage, approach the problem from what is called the line of least expectation. What's your first instinct when faced with a challenge? Is it to outspend your competition, argue with people in an attempt to change the long-held opinion? Are you trying to barge through the front door? Because the back door and the side doors and the window may have been left open. And then on 106, part of the reason why a skill often seems so effortless for great masters is not because they've mastered the process. Not just because they've mastered the process. They really are doing less than the rest of us who don't know any better, They choose to exert only calculated force where it will be effective, rather than straining and struggling with pointless attrition tactics. And just so that people know, the praise of the flank attack, it's a seemingly a tactic where you attack from the sides or from the back. And so that's why they gave the example of, are you going head on, or did maybe they leave the window open or the side door open or something like that. And then jumping to page 108, remember, sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. And then the next chapter is use obstacles against themselves. And then Plutarch, there's a quote from Plutarch: wise men are able to make fitting use even of their oppression. And then a bit further down, sometimes you overcome an obstacle not by attacking them, but by withdrawing and letting them attack you. You can use the actions of others against themselves instead of acting yourself. Weak compared to the forces he hoped to change, Gandhi leaned into the weakness and exaggerated it and exposed himself. He said to the most powerful occupying military in the world, "I am marching to the ocean to collect salt in direct violation of your laws." He was provoking them. What are you going to do about it? Is there anything wrong with what we're doing? Knowing that this placed authorities in an impossible dilemma, enforce a bankrupt policy or abdicate. Within that framework, the military's enormous strength is neutralized. Its very usage is counterproductive. And then a bit further down on page 110. It is time to acknowledge that sometimes adversity might be impossible for you to defeat, no matter how hard you try. Instead, you must find some way to use that adversity's energy to help yourself. And then 111. When we want things too badly, we can be our own worst enemies. In our eagerness, we can strip the very screw we want to turn and make it impossible to ever get what we want. We spin our tires in the snow or the mud, digging a deeper rut, one that we'll never get out of. And then on page 113. Very few obstacles are ever too big for us, because the bigness might be in fact an advantage, because we can use the bigness against the obstacle itself. And then the next one, channel your energy. On page 115 he says, adversity can harden you, or it can loosen you up and make you better if you let it. And then going to the next chapter, seize the offensive. The best men are not those who have waited for changes, but those who have taken them. And then jumping to page 119, focus on the brilliant strategic advice that Obama's advisor, Rahm Emanuel, once gave him. You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. Things that we had postponed for too long, that were long-term, are now immediate and must be dealt with. Crisis provides the opportunity for us to do the things that you could not do before. And then page 120. Ordinary people shy away from negative situations, just as they do with failure. They do their best to avoid trouble. What great people do is the opposite. They are their best in these situations. They turn personal tragedy or misfortune, rarely anything and everything, to their advantage. And then lastly for this part, the action part, is the chapter Prepare for None of It to Work. And then this is on page 123. Perceptions can be managed. Actions can be directed. What we can't do is control the world around us, not as much as we'd like to anyway. We might perceive things well, then act rightly and fail anyway. This is not necessarily a bad thing, because we can turn that obstacle upside down too, simply by using it as an opportunity to practice some other virtue or skill, even if it's just learning to accept that bad things can happen, or practicing humility. And then lastly on page 124, there's nothing else you can do for yourself. If there's nothing else you can do for yourself, at least you can try to help others. Problems, as Duke Ellington once said, are a chance for us to do our best. And that is action. Any last thoughts or comments from that, Peter?
Yeah, I think I have a few things, but to try to rush through them.
Maybe just one or two takeaways.
Cool. Yeah, I think. Okay, let me gather my thoughts to sort of use that wisely. I think. I think that the biggest one, or the one thing, is about the obstacles against themselves. So instead of fighting obstacles, find a means of making them defeat themselves. I think that really, stood out for me. I think it even says on 112, what matters is whether a certain approach gets you to where you want to go. And let's be clear, using obstacles against yourself is very different from doing nothing. Passive resistance is, in fact, incredibly active. But those actions come in the form of discipline, self-control, fearlessness, determination, and grand strategy. So I think that using obstacles against themselves, I think, really, really, really something that stood out for me. I think, I think another thing would just be, I think this is offense, but ordinary people shy away from negative situations just as they do with failure. They do their best to avoid trouble. What great people do is the opposite. They're best in these situations. They turn personal tragedy or misfortune into really everything to their advantage. I think those are the two big takeaways for me in that section.
I think the action the action section in general is a helpful one, just to basically keep pushing forward despite the obstacles. And I agree with the thing that you said about the using the obstacles against themselves is a helpful idea. And then the other one was the flank attack part. I thought it was interesting because we often do want to just tackle things head on. And sometimes that's a good thing. I mean, they even say it sometimes, just go for it, take it head on. But sometimes the wise thing is not to take it head on, to pause, and whether it's pausing and letting the force attack you, I think it's in jiu-jitsu or something where they said you're not supposed to push, you're supposed to pull, or I think you like sort of pull and grapple with the person and things. I can't remember. But to do things like that, and also if you pause and think like, okay, is this the only way that I can do it? And like they said, sometimes the masters of a craft, it's the fact that they look effortless, sometimes is just because they're extremely practiced in something. But sometimes it's because they really are exerting less effort, because they understand that the head-on thing isn't the only way. Like maybe the side door is actually just open and they can walk straight through it. And I think sometimes we always take things head-on, and make our lives a lot more difficult and challenging. And it's incredible to see, like if you work with, let's say, experienced software engineers and that, then you sometimes see almost like a strategy or tactic that they take, and you're like, that is so much simpler than the overcomplicated way that I was approaching it before.
I mean, sorry to just add there, I think I forgot which section it is, but it spoke about exactly how you put it, but it kind of also, like you're saying, the experience of people that have done something often will do it quicker than you, not because they've learned the tricks of what to do and what not to do. So you kind of navigating to get there, and you don't have the problem, but they already know that I need to avoid this if I want this solution, and thus then it takes them way less time than it would take you.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Going on to the last part, will. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through everything in one go, and then leave the last final thoughts one. Let's see how this goes.
I want to say maybe just try break it in half. Maybe, but
I'll try and go through it.
Okay, go through it.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. If it crumbles, it crumbles.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so part 3 is the will. And on page 125 it says, what is will? Will is our intentional power which can never be affected by the outside world. And then a little bit further down, too often people think that will is how bad we want something. In actuality, will has a lot more to do with surrender than with strength. Try God willing over the will to win, or willing into existence for even those attributes that can be broken. True will is quiet humility, resistance, and flexibility. The other kind of will is weakness in disguise, disguised by bluster and ambition. And then going to the discipline of will, that's the first chapter, on page 127. Because he has become more of a myth than a man, most people are unaware that Abraham Lincoln battled crippling depression his entire life, known at the time as melancholy. A little bit further down it says, inside he struggled to manage the heavy burden that often felt impossible to lift. Lincoln's life was defined by enduring and transcending great difficulty. Growing up in rural poverty, losing his mother while he was still a child, educating himself, teaching himself law, losing the woman he loved as a young man. And then on the next page, 128, Lincoln's personal challenges had been so intense that he came to believe that they were destined for him in some way, and that the depression especially was a unique experience that prepared him for greater things. And then to page 131. Even in his own time, Lincoln's contemporaries marveled at the calmness and gravity and compassion of the man. In a way, he was almost as though from another planet. Schooled in suffering, to quote Virgil, Lincoln learned to comfort those who suffer too. This too is part of the will, to think of others to make the best of a terrible situation, what we tried to prevent but could not, to deal with fates with cheerfulness and compassion. Lincoln's words went to people's hearts because they came from his, because he had access to a part of the human experience that many walled themselves from. His personal pain was his advantage. And then jumping to the next, building your inner citadel, page 134. By age 12, Theodore Roosevelt had spent most of his everyday short life struggling with a horrible asthma. And then essentially his dad says to him one day, like, look, son, you are smart, but your body is weak. And then Theodore essentially takes this on as a challenge, and his dad helps him with a gym. And then he does a whole bunch of training, and he essentially says, I'm going to build up my body. And then he ends up doing that. And then it says here, by his early 20s, the battle against asthma was essentially over. He'd worked, almost literally, the weakness out of his body. And then on page 135, not everyone accepts their bad start in life. They remake their body. Not everyone accepts their bad start in life. They remake their bodies and their lives with activities and exercise. And then jumping to page 139. A CEO calls, so this is called thinking negatively or anticipation. That's what the section is called. A CEO calls her staff into a conference room. I have bad news. The project is has failed spectacularly. Tell me what went wrong. What? We haven't even launched yet. That's the point. The CEO is forcing an exercise in hindsight in advance. She is using a technique designed by psychologist Gary Klein, known as a pre-mortem. And then jumping to 143. The person who's rehearsed in their mind what could go wrong will not be caught by surprise. The person who is ready to be disappointed won't be. They will have the strength to bear it. They are not likely to get discouraged or shirk from the task that lies before them. And then the next one is the art of acquiescence, page 144. Thomas Jefferson, born quiet and contemplative, reserved, purportedly he had a speech impediment at birth as well. And then a bit further down, his heart set on politics, he had two options: fight against this sentence or accept it. He chose the latter, channeling his energy into writing, which others put into oratory instead. There he found his medium. He found that he could express himself clearly. Writing was his strength. And then on page 146, the Stoics have a beautiful name for this attitude. They called it the art of acquiescence. Okay, should we try and pause there and then do one takeaway thought each?
Okay, I will try and be wise with my takeaway there. I'm trying to see what I can
go.
Okay, go for it.
Go
for it. Yeah, go for it.
So obviously there's a lot of interesting parts there, but I think the idea of just having a certain will and pursuing it, I think is important. But it's also when it gets to something where we're like, oh, this is just not something that is for me. Like, it's just not something that almost was meant for me by fate. Like in the case of Thomas Jefferson, the last part that I read there, where he apparently had a speech impediment. And so we've seen a bunch of things in this book where people are like, I'm not going to accept my fate. And then Demosthenes, or however you pronounce his name, he put stones in his mouth and did all these kind of different training. But Jefferson instead decided to say, okay, I'm not going to do that. So he did the art of acquiescence. He's like, I'm not going to do that. And instead, I'm going to focus my energy on something that I enjoy and am capable of. And he worked at the craft of writing, which obviously probably wasn't great at to start off with. He was probably just fine. But he pushed at that and got good at that craft and was able to then end up, writing apparently the Declaration of Independence in a single draft, which is quite something.
Yeah. Oh, okay, my takeaway there was on Build Your Inner Citadel. So mine was no one is born a gladiator. No one is born with an inner citadel. If we are going to succeed in achieving our goals, despite the obstacles that may come, this strength in will must be built. So yeah, it's just again, like, you kind of have to kind of go at it, like again, it's like practice. So from the actions, like try again, like it's yes, as much as will is there, it's, and I can't remember what book we read that spoke about this, but it's it's like a muscle, it's built over time, your willingness to kind of muscle through things. And, so that's also just my thought there, to be like, we shouldn't be discouraged by obstacles. They will be there and they'll come and over again.
Yep. Got to keep using them to your advantage. All right. So then carrying on page 150, love everything that happens. Amor fati, which translates to love of fate. And then it says here, at age 67, Thomas Edison returned home early one evening from another day at the laboratory. Shortly after his dinner, a man came rushing to his house with urgent news. A fire had broken out at Edison's research and production campus a few miles away, threatening to destroy the entire empire Edison had spent his life building. Edison calmly but quickly made his way to the fire. Then a bit further down, looking for his son, "Go get your mother and get her to get her friends," he told his son with a childlike excitement. "They'll never see a fire like this again," he said. "Don't worry, Edison," and then people were like, "What?" And then, "Don't worry," Edison calmed them. "It's all right. We've just got rid of a whole bunch of rubbish." And then a bit further down, Edison wasn't heartbroken, not because he could have, not as he could have and probably should have been. Instead, it invigorated him. As he told the reporter the next day, he wasn't too old to make a fresh start. And then jumping to perseverance, just page 158. There are far more failures in this world due to a collapse of will than there will ever be from objectively conclusive external events. And then jumping to the next, something bigger than yourself. A man's job is to make the world a better place to live in, so far as he is able, always remembering the results will be infinitesimal, and to attend to his own soul. Leroy Percy. And then they give the example of the United States Navy fighter pilot James Stockdale, who got shot down, and then essentially he lived for, he knew that he was a very high-ranking officer or commander, and then he knew that things would not be good for him, but he focused on the other men that were there and put all his effort and thinking into that. And that's what kind of helped him keep going. And then jumping to page 164, you'll be shocked by how much of the hopelessness lifts when we reach that conclusion, because we now have something to do. Like Stockdale, we now have a mission, and the conclusion being focusing on others, not focusing on ourselves. And then page 167, mediate on your mortality. In late 1569, a French nobleman named Michael de Montaigne was given up as dead after being flung off a galloping horse. The sublime and unusual experience marked the moment when Montaigne changed his life. Within a few years, he would be one of the most famous writers in Europe. A story as old as time. Man nearly dies, he takes stock, and emerges from the experience completely different and a better person. Every culture, this is a bit further down. Every culture has its own way of teaching the same lesson. Memento mori, the Romans would remind themselves. Remember, you are mortal. And then page 170. Remember the serenity prayer. If something is is in our control, it's worth every ounce of effort and energy. Death is not one of those things. It is not in our control how long we live, or what will come, or what will take us from life. But thinking about and being aware of our mortality creates real perspective and urgency. It doesn't need to be depressing. because it's invigorating. And then lastly, prepare to start again. On 172, the great law of nature is that it never stops. There's no end. Just when you think you've successfully navigated one obstacle, another emerges. But it's what keeps life interesting. And as you've started to see, this is what creates opportunities. And then he says, one does not overcome an obstacle to enter the land of no obstacles. Then on the next page, passing one obstacle simply says that you're worthy of more. Yeah. What is your takeaway there, Peter?
Yeah, I will sort of cling on to the last thing that you said there about prepare to start again. Getting through one obstacle doesn't mean you're done with them all. There's another one waiting for you to overcome again. Just thinking about it that way, and then just going back to the perseverance, about 158, where there are far more failures in the world due to the collapse of will than there will ever be from objectivity, conclusive external events. Perseverance forces perseverance, force of purpose. It's just there will always ever be external events, but we just have to kind of forge on, and also
Thomas
I think
Anderson all over again.
and I mean,
there's probably so many people that failed at the same sort of thing. But kept going.
That's fine. And I mean, even that, I think it's in this section where we read about the fire as well. I mean, that in itself was like an interesting reaction, and I mean, when I was reading that, I mean, it spoke about how most people would have probably been, heartbroken or in sort of a state for a period, but to him it was like, okay, cool, like it's done. And I realized, like, hearing that, I was like, that is really like, unless you're in it, but if you're delivered bad news or you have come face to face to this, it's like, it's done. It's like, what's my next course of action? You can't just dwell in that, because then you're not moving anywhere. And then that's what takes you to the next one. Like, once one obstacle is done, there's another one coming on. There's a lot I want to add, but press the time. But yeah,
I mean, I think the fascinating thing about the Edison example where there's the fire is that, yes, it's the way that he reacted, but to me, it's what it means about him in terms of the character that he formed, his like mental character. I don't actually know much about Edison, if he was like a good person or not, or things. But at least one thing is clear from that he had formed a character which did not see obstacles in the way that most people see obstacles. Most people would have been crushed by that and been like, I've just built up everything and now lost it all. And he in that moment, which shows why it's a character thing, not just like a happenstance. He happened to have reacted in a way that's interesting. Like, his whole character up to that point had been formed so that was the way that he would react in that situation. And I think that's an amazing thing to see when you you see someone do something heroic. It's a very impactful thing. And I think part of it is sort of maybe even not realizing to ourselves at the time, but part of it is that it shows us something about the character of that person. Maybe not their character as a whole, but at least some part of their character is formed in a way that we are like, that's great. Like, that's That's the way that we want people to be in the world. And then the other thing on page 164 was where it says, sometimes when we're personally stuck with something intractable or impossible, one of the best ways to create opportunities or new avenues for movement is to think, if I can't solve this for myself, how can I at least make this better for other people? And I think that that's also very helpful, because we're often so stuck in our own minds that, All right, before we run out of time, I think we have like 5 minutes left. Let's read through the final thoughts chapter, starting on page 175. So this is the ending part. Late in his reign, sick and possibly near death, Marcus Aurelius received surprising news. His old friend and most trusted general, Avidius Cassius, had rebelled in Syria. Having heard that the emperor Marcus was vulnerable and possibly even dead, the ambitious general Cassius had decided to declare himself Caesar and forcibly seize the throne. Marcus should have been angry. History would have forgiven him for wanting revenge to this. But Marcus instead did nothing. He waited to see if Cassius would come to his senses. Then a bit further down, Cassius did not. And so Marcus called a council of his soldiers and made a rather extraordinary announcement that they would march against Cassius and obtain the great prize of war and victory. But of course, it was Marcus, and so the prize was something wholly different to what we would have expected. And then on 176, they would capture Cassius and endeavor not to kill him, but, in quote, and this is a quote, to forgive a man who has wronged one, to remain a friend to one who has transgressed friendship, to continue faithful to one who has broken faith. Marcus had controlled his perceptions. He would not take it personally. He acted rightly and firmly, ordering his troops to Rome to calm the panicking crowds, and then to set out to do what must be done, to protect the empire and put down the threat. As he told his men, if there was one profit they could derive from this awful situation that they had not wanted, it would be to settle this affair well and to show to all mankind that there's a right way to deal even with civil wars. And then Ryan says the obstacle becomes the way. And then a bit later, for Cassius and Marcus, their destiny was changed when a lone assassin, unrelated, struck Cassius down in Egypt 3 months later. And then on the next page, 177, arriving in the provinces shortly after his death, shortly after the death of Cassius, Marcus refused to put any conspirators to death. He declined to prosecute any of the senators or governors who had endorsed or expressed support for the uprising. And then a bit further down, if our only option, as was the case with Marcus, because of someone else's greed or lust for power, is simply to be a good person and practice forgiveness, well, that's a pretty good option. And then the very last page, he says, let's remind ourselves once again, and this is a summary of the perception, action, and will. He says, let's remind ourselves again. See things for what they are. Do, and that's perception. Then will, then action. Do what we can, and then will. Endure and bear what we must. And then he puts it differently. What blocked the path is now the path. What once impeded action advances action. The obstacle is the way. Any last concluding thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, no, just one snippet and then the final thoughts is there on page 178 it says, not everyone looks at obstacles, often the same ones you and I face, and sees reason to despair. In fact, they see the opposite. They see a problem with a ready solution. They see a chance to test and improve themselves. Nothing stands in their way. Rather, everything guides them on the way. And I mean, that essentially kind of then translates or leads to the obstacle is the way. And yeah, just echo the last few points that you read, that yeah, we need not to see, and I mean, I think I've said this a few times today, but see obstacles as the end, where something comes to an end, but rather that, there is something beyond that point. That always sums up my thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think from my side, I think the end part with Marcus Aurelius is a great way to end this book, where basically one of the worst things that could happen to someone like Marcus, an emperor, is to have someone, especially a close friend, basically seize your throne, because now you have to do something about it. And the normal thing would be, especially in those days, I assume, to just say like, okay, well, I'm going to have to put you to death.
Yeah.
Whereas for him, he was like, no, I want to forgive the person who wronged me. And that is, in a way, both at the moment that he does that, it's forming his character to be better. And it's also showing, like it showed the troops, and it shows us now, still today, that there are ways to handle things that can be good and right and just and moral, even in the most drastic of situations. And then the obstacle can become the way. It can teach us things that we couldn't have learnt otherwise. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I think that is it, Peter.
Thanks very much. Thanks, James.
Until the next one.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool.